just like to say welcome to everyone.
Yeah.
And just once again, just so honored that Apostle and Pastor Wanda would allow me to speak. And of course, so honored to our Lord Jesus the Christ.
Amen.
For just honoring me and allowing me to stand before you and to speak. Unless you do it, you just have a hard time understanding what it is I'm trying to say, because it's so humbling. There's nothing proud about it or boastful about it. It's just a humbling thing to know that the Lord and your apostle is allowing you to touch people's lives that they have the responsibility over. So I'm just never take that for granted. That's what I'm trying to say. Tonight I really feel impressed to do something a little different than I normally do, rather than just doing like a teaching session or a teaching lesson. I really want to share with you some of my life experiences.
Thank you,
And perhaps do some teaching out of that. And as you can probably already tell, I'm a little bit emotional about it in some things, and some of the things I just hope you'll be graceful and help me to get through some of the things as I speak about them.
Thank you, Jesus.
But I really feel impressed to do it, and it's been a long time coming. I was an 18-year-old young man, and when I started my work career, and I was full of self-effort, full of self-confidence, and really believed that I could do anything that I really wanted to do. And that was 50 years ago. So a lot of things have happened.
A lot has happened.
So anyways, for those of you who do not know, I was employed and have been for almost most of the last 50 years, up to a year ago when I retired. I've been employed as what's called a non-destructive testing inspector. Now, for those of you who don't know what that is, it's basically a form of quality control inspection where you test using certain scientific methods and techniques, like X-ray and ultrasound and magnetic particle and liquid penetrant testing. You test things that are critical, manufactured items, structures like planes and aircraft and spacecraft and bridges and buildings, things where if they fail, it would have a detrimental effect on the public at large. So it's not just like a regular, I've worked also just a regular quality control where basically the worst thing that can happen is that you send it to the customer, it doesn't fit, and they just send it back, right? And you get a slap on the wrist, oh, there goes quality, missed that again. Well, yeah, but what about the person who made it? They missed it too. Why is it quality always the bad guy? Right? But anyways, what I'm saying is this is a much higher calling than that, because it's dealing with you, with actually having to deal with public safety. And because of that, you are required to have specific schooling to learn all these different methods. And along with the schooling, you need a lot of hours of experience, and then after that, when you're ready, you can take the government exams, and once you take the government exams, then you can become certified. And basically all that means is that companies will now hire you to do their inspection that the government requires of them, and you can sign a report. All they care about is your signature on the report saying that that meets the specification that they're looking for. Right? And it lets them off the hook because I said it was okay. Right? So basically, that's what that is. And so I started off, I didn't really choose this, it kind of chose me in a way, and that's another whole long story. But anyhow, for about the first 10 years of my work career, everything was good. You're young. You're like I said, full of self-ambition, full of self-confidence. You know, I progressed really quickly. I learned all my field really quickly. I got all my tickets quite quickly. And, you know, I received a lot of accolades from those who I worked with and my bosses, and everything was going along really well. You know, for that first 10 years, I married the lovely girl that lived next door to me, and had a wonderful daughter, Heidi, while we were still in Ontario, and things, you know, there were rocky roads. I'm not saying there wasn't in the beginning, but basically, as time went by, things got pretty good. We ended up that I was making pretty good money. We ended up in a really nice 3-bedroom apartment in Grimsby that you know, was really spacious. We really enjoyed it. Everything was going quite good. I was working, you know, driving back and forth to Oakville, working, and things were really looking up. Going to a church then that with a man that I had met from, surprisingly enough, Brantford, and this was before we ever lived in Brantford, and even in that time, I was introduced at a meeting to a young prophet pastor from Durant, Oklahoma, by the name of Scott Stimpson, and he prophesied over me the very first prophecy I'd ever received. And in that prophecy, he had said that I didn't know it at the time, but years later I realized that he was actually laying out my course of life and that the Lord had for me. And I really didn't know it at the time until much later. I know it plainly now. And the one thing that really stood out to me that he had said was, "You shall be," and see, this is what I've seen as being the course of life for me. He said, "And you shall be a vessel of love and forgiveness poured out to many." And he said, "And many look at you and say, you're really free. But I will show you and teach you a freedom you know nothing of." And he says, "But know this, for in your own strength, surely you shall fail." And that hit me at the time, but then realistically, after a while, I kind of just forgot about it. I would read those things like Apostle always taught us to do. I would read those things, but that really had struck me, because again, you're going through life, you're all full of, you know, you're all full of yourself, really. When you're young like that, you're just doing your thing. So, anyways, I got a call from my manager one day, well, this again while we were still living in Grimsby, and he said, "Greg, there's a company in St. John, New Brunswick called St. John Shipbuilding, and they have a contract that's going to last for about 12 or 15 years we got the contract for doing all the x-rays on the ship. And we would really like it if you would to go down there. You're going to be the manager. We're going to get you an office. We want you to start up a company, hire all your own men, train them, get them ready to go and fulfill this contract. And, you know, we'll pay you X number of dollars and all this. We'll bring your wife down, the whole deal." So I thought this was a really good idea. I'm going to tell you, I wasn't in the place I was after I met Apostle and Pastor Wanda, where I checked all that out and everything. Basically, I just thought, you know what, that's really good. That sounds like a good deal. And I said, okay, well, I'm going to have to talk to my wife about this. and I went and I could tell that Trish was a little bit apprehensive because she's never left her mom or her family or anything, never been away from them before. I worked on the road a whole lot, so I'd been away from my parents a lot. So I mean, it wasn't as big of a deal for me. But as she is lovingly always does, she just said, "Whatever you think is right." I said, "I trust you, and I trust the hand, and I believe I trust the hand of the Lord that's on you."
Amen.
And so again, I could spend an hour on just this part of it, but just to jump over to it, otherwise we're going to be here all night. We ended up in St. John, New Brunswick. Let's put it that way.
Yep.
So again, it was difficult at the beginning, like every transition in.
Yes.
It was difficult. I was trying to get an office going. I was away sometimes 17-hour days, right? Trish was at home by herself so much at the beginning. But then after a while, I would say it must have been pretty close to about 2 years that we had been there. Things got really good. We had moved out. Yeah, we had moved out to Barnesville, a really beautiful little town. Lived in a farmhouse. Our beautiful second daughter Kelly was born, and that was just just wonderful. The things that were taking place. I had finally got to the point where everything was set up, so I was home pretty well every night. I was home on the weekends. I wasn't having to go away all the time. We had this beautiful farmhouse out in the middle of the country where we had deers in our backyard in the morning. Like, it was just like the income was steady. Everything looked so good. I was just content that, Lord, I'm good for the rest of my life. This is good right here. I'm good. Like this is
You know it is, Mark. You know it's
this is
good.
what happened. You know, I was really happy.
Yeah.
So then some time passed by, and I can't remember if it was a weekend or not, but Trish, we were sitting down at breakfast, and Trish says, I had a dream last night that we were back in Ontario. And I would have just written that off to, well, hon, you know what, that's just you wanting to go back to Ontario, but I have no intention. I'm happy. I'm happy right here doing what we're doing. And that would have been the case, except for the night before I had the same dream.
There you go. Yep.
And so anyways, I was saying, okay, well, that, like let every word be established by
Yeah,
two
here
witnesses,
we go.
right? So I just kind of sat on that for a little bit.
Yeah.
But over the next couple of weeks, it just got more and more and more pressing upon me. I could feel the weight of it. And so it didn't take too long before I really felt impressed of the Lord in my heart. A word that kept kind of saying to me, you are to return to Ontario because I have called you to assist the man of God. And that was in my heart. And so I knew just from that word and how pressing it was. The other thing is we had found a really nice church there that we were going to. I had become really good friends with the pastor there, of course, with me. By this time, I was my own boss, and I would go and we would have lunch all the time and talk about the word. And so we were really happy with all those kind of things. So anyways, I knew that if we were going to go back to Ontario, I was going to have to, number one, talk to my landlord. Two, the biggest thing, I was going to have to talk to my boss, who had already had all this set up. He'd gone through all of this stuff to get all these guys trained and everything else. And also, I have to talk to this pastor that, that we're leaving, we're going back to Ontario. So anyways, all three of them thought we were nuts. And I remember one night the lady from the church called up Trish and was going, oh, you guys are being deceived and the whole thing like this on the phone, right? And I understand where they were coming from. I get it because it was such a drastic move for us. It was like a night and day turnabout. But I was very impressed of the Lord, and I'm going to say compelled to do it.
Yes, sir.
To return to Ontario. Now, I know now that I was called to come back to assist apostle, but I didn't know that then. I didn't know that at all. I really kind of thought that it was talking about this man that I told you, the church that we were at before.
Yeah.
That's who I thought I was going back to assist. So anyways, after all of this and being completely settled and wanting to, spend the rest of my life here, here we are, packed up everything we got, driving back to Ontario with nothing. No money. We had no money. I was just hoping I was going to still, because my bosses were mad at me, I was hoping I was going to have a job, if maybe, And the only address we had was a broken down, leaky trailer in the back of Trish's mom and dad's house,
Okay.
right, in Smithville.
Didn't have air conditioning.
That's all we have. So here I'm leaving this,
Yep,
that I was content the rest of my life to go back to that,
yep.
right?
Yeah.
So, anyways, the Lord is always the Lord. Like I see it plainly now. The Lord has always had His hand on this the whole way, right? He directed this whole thing, and the Lord grants us grace with my boss, and they just allow me to carry on back in Ontario. And in fact, it worked out really good because they actually gave me the truck to bring home. I could bring it home with me all the time. And they said, you know what we want you to do, Greg? We got a lot of customers down the Niagara Peninsula, Hamilton, all the way to Brantford.
Yep.
And we'll just let you keep the truck at home and you just go ahead and do that kind of stuff. And so that worked out all right. And the living conditions weren't all that great, but in this meantime, the Lord had connected us supernaturally with Apostle and Pastor Wanda. Now that again is another whole hour-long miracle story that I could tell, but we don't have the time for that tonight. Suffice to say that the Lord connected us together, and at that point I realized that it was Him that I was called back to assist. And of course, as they have done ever since then, even right up to now until our move to Brantford and everything else, they made sure we had a place to live, and we ended up in a nice house. We ended up in a nice house rented on Deborah Court or something like that.
In Grimsby, Deborah.
Yeah, and then on Main Street, right up to actually moving into Brantford a year later. So everything was kind of back to normal. Job was okay, we had a place to live, all that kind of thing. Things were as normal as they were going to be. Not as good as they were in New Brunswick, all that, but things were pretty good. And of course, as Apostle said 33 years ago, I guess it was, started up a ministry, and all that was just wonderful. It was just a really exciting time. So then something changed. I had to go to the office one day. I don't know whether I was getting supplies or something like that, but I had to go over to Oakville. And while I was there, the manager said, "Can you please go in and talk to the vice president?" I'm just leaving names and company names out of this because we're recording it, right? And said, go in and see the vice president. He wants to talk to you about something. So I went down. I went into the vice president. I thought, does he want us to go back to New Brunswick again? And so I went into the office, and he goes, "Greg, I got some news for you." And I said, "What's that?" And he said, that we received in the mail some documents from a company in New Brunswick that they're suing us. That it was a job I guess I had done a couple of months before I had left there. And I guess what had happened on this job was there was a huge gear. It looked like, if you could imagine, a huge wagon wheel on a wagon with gear teeth on it. And this was a great big metal gear. It went on a roller on a paper machine anyway. It doesn't really matter now. And I was called out to x-ray this because they were going to install it on this machine. And so I x-rayed it all, and everything was good. I cleared it all with the x-rays and everything was on here. And I guess what had happened, according to what my vice president was telling me, was that after they had installed it, after a little while, this thing completely shattered, flew apart, caused devastating damage, and we weren't sure at the time because they weren't sharing everything, but we were to understand that somebody was either critically or fatally injured because of this, and we're being sued from this. So that you can imagine, this is the first time in my whole job career I've faced any kind of adversity at all. My knees started to buckle. Wow. Something snapped in my mind right away. This guy that was so self-confident, I can do anything, something snapped in my mind, and all of a sudden a whole lot of that confidence started going, right? And so he said, we'll keep you abreast. They're going to do all their investigations and all that kind of stuff, and we'll just let you know where we're going to go from here. Just carry on and keep working. And I said, I can see nothing that I did wrong. I don't see I did anything wrong. But you know, then you know, all of a sudden your mind, and this is one of the things I started realizing, that something was starting to go on with my mind, because all of a sudden now, all these what ifs started happening. I started all what did I do that right? Or, you know, you start having all these self-doubt questions all start arising. So I'm going to say about the next month or so, I was just going through agony, just anguish, just constant worry, something I had never felt in my life before. I never felt afraid or anxious about anything in my life. This was so new to me. And the thing more than anything else was the dread. It was the dread that something that I did caused somebody's death. And I just couldn't live with that. It was trying to live with the guilt of that. And so anyways, about a month went by, about a month or month and a half, something like that. I hadn't been sleeping well. I could really tell that my mental health was not in a good place. And I stopped at the shop. I think I was going on a job out in Oakville somewhere, and or in Toronto. And again, the manager says, the vice president wants to see you again. So I thought, oh no, here it comes. And so I go down into his office, and he goes, Greg, we got some news from the lawyer. The guys, I guess the prosecuting investigators have gone through and they've looked at everything, and they've had their experts in NDT look at everything, and they say that their only words were that everything was done completely professionally and completely in an excellent manner, and that their experts looked at all the films and they saw exactly the same thing you did. And so the prosecutors have decided to drop the case, and they're just going to go after the manufacturers and the installers for them. So of course, I'm almost ready to fall on my knees and start crying. I don't know if you've ever felt relief before, but you know, like the best thing I can explain it to you, if you ever get that brain freeze so bad that you can't even stand it, and all of a sudden the brain freeze finally goes away, and you go, that relief you get from it. Like, I mean, like just this sudden relief that I got from it. And I was just so thankful to the Lord, because, and especially as I thought about it over the days and the months after that, was because of two things. Number one was that the people told me when I went there on the job to do that, make sure that you just, you know, take your time and do it right, because we're not in a hurry for you to, you know, you have to realize this is a business. You can't, even though my heart was always to do the very best job I could do to the best of my ability, how many know that doing the best job you can at the best of your ability takes time? And sometimes if you're working in a business where people are paying you, you can't always, you gotta speed it up sometimes. But it was just such a blessing that he said to me, just take, so I was able to double check, make sure I crossed all my T's and dotted all my I's, which gave them nothing to actually even get a foothold on when they did their investigation. The other thing that I really thank the Lord for was that the x-rays were really clear. There wasn't anything on the x-ray where I had to go, like make a judgment call. That's the worst thing for NDT inspectors, is not everything is black and white. Sometimes you have to make a decision, a judgment call. And what I make a judgment call at, somebody else may look at that a totally different way. And because there was none of that, the Lord, I always thank the Lord that he just made it so that the gear was so good that there wasn't anything like that. So they couldn't even really question anything like that. So it ended up anyways that it was the actual manufacturer, they used the wrong material that wasn't hard enough in it, and that's why it all blew apart. So anyways, that, like I said, the relief came from that, but I have to be completely honest, something had changed in my life. Because now I went from being completely confident in what I was doing to I'm going to say feeling using a scriptural term, the weight of the responsibility of it. Now the weight of what I was doing, what I was getting paid to do. Now I thought, for the first time I was always aware of it, but almost like a race car driver who never thinks about crashing, right? Because if they think about crashing, they'll never do it, right? I just never really thought about it that way. But now I was very much aware of that. But, you know, time passes, and as the world likes to say, time is the great healer, right? And you start to kind of forget about things don't have that much of an effect on you. But again, I was still very much aware of that. And it really, it brought to my mind another incident that I was called one night at home and was asked, Greg, get a bag. You're going to be gone for about a week. Get to the office right away. You have to go up to Northern Ontario. I thought, okay. And he said, yeah, I guess the main pipeline, the natural gas pipeline that came from Alberta into Ontario, it's a 30-inch diameter pipe. That's a big pipe.
Yeah.
Filled with 1,500 PSI of natural gas. That's a lot of pressure. That's a bomb. That brings the gas from Alberta into Ontario. And they said that up in just about 5 kilometers north of this little town, I'll leave the name of the town rather than that there was a rupture in the line, and it's caused an explosion and a lot of devastation, and it's getting near. It was near fall. It was near the middle to getting near the end of fall. So of course that meant heating season coming. So they had to get this. It was actually a half a mile long section of the pipe, and they needed to get that all repaired and back in place and up again. So we had to go up right away. So we got up there and went past the little town, basically a diner, a gas station, and a little motel, right? And maybe 25 houses. And went to the job site. It was off a rural road, and maybe about a quarter of a mile off of the road was where the job site was. Now, when I got there, I could not believe what I saw. It looked like the surface of the moon. Where this pipe, the pipe had, now this was hours and hours later by the time we got there. And I guess let me just put it this way. What happens is that when the pipe, if there's a flaw or a defect in the pipe, that pipe with 1,500 pounds of pressure in it, it microscopically flexes millions of times an hour over many years, right? And what happens if there is a flaw there, it creates a stress riser around the flaw, because the flaw itself isn't flexing as much as the rest of the pipe. You get that? You understand what I'm saying? It's like you got two things fighting against each other. I'm talking microscopic, you'd never even see the flexing, right? But so then what happens after a while is that it creates a fracture around the flaw. Then what happens is the flaw breaks out. As soon as you got that, you got 1,500 pounds trying to get out a little tiny spot. What it does is actually, could you imagine, take a rope, bury it about 3 or 4 inches under a piece of sand, say a 20-foot rope, grab it like this and whip it out of the water. That's exactly what happens to the pipe, and it's buried 5 to 6 feet under the ground. And it lifts right up out of the ground and waves right down and lays right out flat on the ground, the metal when it's over. That's how the way it rips. The only thing that stops it, if it hits like a valve or something that's heavier than the 1/4-inch pipe itself, it stops it. So that stops it from going any farther. Otherwise, if the next valve is 40 miles down the road, it's going to keep going for 40 miles until it hits something. Now, this is natural gas, And the natural gas, you can't put it out. All they can do is the station that was actually 20 miles the other way, they just have, it shuts off automatically with the loss of pressure, shuts off automatically, so then for hours that gas just burns out. They have to let it out. So you're talking about a Bunsen burner that's a quarter of a mile long. We went back into the town, and the people in the town said, yeah, we were talking to the diner, this happened in the middle of the night. And he said, it sounded to us 5 kilometers away, it sounded to us like there was a jumbo jet hovering right over our houses. That's how loud the noise was, and the rush of the gas coming out of the... And he said that it was, we looked out our windows and it looked like it was daylight outside. And they said they came outside, and many of them said, we thought it was the end of the world, some apocalyptic thing. The fire was, you imagine, it's a half a mile long, and it's as high in the sky, they said, as they could see. And it wouldn't stop burning until it all burned out. I'm telling you all this just because you start to see this is what I started thinking about, that I was saying was okay, right? This was the weight of the responsibility I was starting to feel. So the pipeline company was very fortunate that it happened where it did, because it was out in the middle of nowhere. There was one house that was about, I'm going to say, well, it was, like I say, it was about a quarter of a mile in. This house was on the road. So it was probably 200 feet in from the road. That house was a pile of ashes sitting there. They were so fortunate that the family that lived in that house that weekend decided to go and visit relatives. So nobody died from it. But that house, and the engineers that were on the site told us that house that was completely just ash never had a flame touch it. That was just from the heat, from a quarter of a mile away, just absolutely disintegrated that house. So you're seeing the kind of devastation that this can do. That is why we have to x-ray all the wells. That's why they do a hydrostatic test on all the pipes. They do all these testing on them to make sure that these things won't happen. But they still do happen from time to time. Again, it turned out that with this one, it was years ago, there was this pipe that they used, the engineers determined it had a hard spot in it, where the pipe was actually harder in one spot than was around it, and that's what created this problem. It had nothing to do with the welds or anything to do with me. Or I never even x-rayed any of that. We x-rayed what went back in again. But so you can see from that things really started changing in my mind. I was just not really being disciplined as I should have been. I felt I had no support group whatsoever as far as NDT. This was the problem. People, they're paying money, for you to go out and do this job. It's all really cutthroat. And they don't allow you to say, oh, can I just wait and bring somebody from the shop to come over and they can actually see if this is okay, what I'm doing, like if they agree. You know how the doctors they go to another doctor and get like kind of a backup on, second opinion. There's none of that. You're on your own, right? And so of course, I really started to get in, and I could only imagine the things I was putting Trish through. And I know Apostle and Pastor Wanda are well aware of this time in my life, because I was not sleeping at all. I would always fall asleep when I was absolutely exhausted, and then I would wake up with some kind of a nightmare, dreaming about something blowing up and, whatever.